I've got a new book, so I thought I'd share the love. Paul Strand, The Garden at Orgeval. Strand is rightly regarded as one of the gods of 20th century photography. He had a long and productive life, who produced now what are regarded as iconic images such as these. His early work shows a deep interest in the modernist movement, which around this time, First World War, 1920s, 1930s, was in full bloom. And in my opinion, this period, the age of the Bauhaus, Mondrian, Malevich, Paul Klee, Le Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe, Picasso and Matisse were still in their pomp. This time remains the high watermark, the benchmark, for almost any visual art practice, painting, design, architecture, even typography. A tremendously revolutionary and innovative time that I don't think has been bettered. In music too. One had Stravinsky, Schoenberg, the ballets of Diaghilev. You had the literary masterpieces of James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, T.S. Eliot, etc., etc. Wow, what a time. I often wonder, who have we got now? Who are the gods that are bestriding the planet? Well, I'm sure there's a few, but you get my point. It was a great time for the arts. So this was the seedbed for Paul Strand, and one can see in his earlier work the modernist concern for structure, rigour, abstraction, simplicity, complexity, seriousness, and a general disdain of dewy-eyed nostalgia and romanticism. But I'm happy to report that Strand was not a cold-hearted formalist. He was very politically and socially engaged, very keen to show the human condition and the state of ordinary working people and minorities in New York. And further afield, he travelled widely across Europe and Africa. But I don't want this to be a biography of Paul Strand. I want to concentrate on his last body of work, his photographic documentation of his own garden at Orgeval, which is just west of Paris, where he lived from 1949. Most of these photos were taken in the late 1960s, early 70s, when Strand himself was in his late 70s. He died in 1975. An artist's late work is often very interesting. It tends to be a summation and elucidation on everything they have learnt during their life. Free of the trammels of youthful ambition, free perhaps of the fear of controversy, perhaps enabled rather than impaired by physical disablement. They may no longer be able to travel the world or work throughout the night without sleep, without their youthful vigour. They are compelled to look much closer to home, physically and metaphorically, to turn inwards and draw upon their lifelong experiences and hard-won knowledge, to see the world in a grain of sand, as it were, and express age-old passions, ancient wisdom, with a few flicks of the brush. One can think of the old and infirm Matisse, confined to his bed or his wheelchair, producing astonishing expressions of life and human vitality, armed with nothing more than a pair of scissors and coloured paper, or a lump of charcoal tied to a very long stick. Or one can think of Edgar Degas, an artist I love so much I named my son after him, who in his old age, practically blind, no longer able to fiddle about with oil paint and canvas, took to using intense, bold strokes of pastel, scrunched and mashed and vaporized into the heavy paper, to produce these blazing works, his unmatched draftsmanship still evident in the screes of blazing colour. Or old Paul Cézanne, a virtual recluse in his home, occasionally sallying forth into his beloved Provence countryside to push Mont Sainte-Victoire to the very edge of abstraction and fathering the development of modern art, well, for at least the next 50 years and beyond. And I also have to mention one of my own personal gods, Paul Klee, who, although he died at the relatively young age of 61, In his last years, he suffered from a debilitating disease called sclerodermia, or systematic sclerosis, a painful and exhausting condition. Yet his last work is a triumph of power, inventiveness, dynamism, and even spirituality. And all this is just to mention a few 20th century artists. Let's not digress further and talk about the late great work of Beethoven or Thomas Hardy. The list is almost endless. Let's get back to Paul Strand in his cardigan and slippers, standing in his garden. These are beautiful, subtle, poetic and eloquent images. Beautifully composed, one can sense Strand moving his camera an inch to the left there, or peering through the viewfinder, moving it a few inches lower here. There is not only a concern for composition, but also texture and tone. You can see that he has often chosen subjects that display a variety of sensory or tactile contrasts: flat, smooth leaves, rough bark, spiky stalks, round forms, jagged forms, hard stone, soft soil, brittle twigs, feathery ferns, tall and wide, small and sharp. Black and white photographs, of course, that allow you to luxuriate in the velvety tones from rich deep blacks to bone whites and every tone in between. They are symphonies in grey. I think I've said in another video that there is often more colour in black and white photographs, and I hope you can see what I mean here. Stripped of their naturalistic colour, these images become infused with colour in a way. The absence of colour makes you more aware of colour, as well as drawing your attention to structure, form, contrast and light. These are all elements that a painter would also be concerned with, and I have to mention one last artist, a man who also devoted his last years to the depiction of a beloved garden, and that's Claude Monet and his miraculous paintings of his garden at Giverny. At first glance, you could be forgiven for thinking that these two series of works, Strand's garden at Orgeval and Monet's garden at Giverny, couldn't be more different. One seems so formal and perhaps even austere, while the other exudes voluptuous sensuality. Of course, in a way, that exemplifies the nature of the two media, oil paint and film. But both artists are displaying their respective mediums to the full. The genius of oil painting, on the one hand, malleable, sensuous, tactile, and on the other, the precise, clear gaze of the camera lens, able to depict unfathomable detail with the click of a shutter. For me, that is the unique genius of photography, and it's the reason why, personally, I prefer that tradition of photography that stretches back to Fox Talbot and Atget, through Curtis, Walker Evans, right through to Eggleston and Stephen Shaw, the new typography school, the new Dusseldorf school, etc., etc. The straight documentary, the world seen through the precisely placed lens. Not that photography has to be cold and objective, of course, not at all. We all know it can be exceptionally poignant. But painting and photography have their own domains, touching at many points, certainly, but also distinct. Just as I dislike hyper-realist painting that apes photography, so I dislike photography that is, it pretends to be painting. The images are deliberately blurry and unfocused, as if they're trying to copy a watercolour effect. Very misguided, in my opinion. Both Paul Strand and Claude Monet were masters of their mediums, and they are using it to maximum effect here in their last works, expressing their love of their gardens and the love of their medium, the love of their art, in these epiphanies. Monet showing the splendour of sunlight and colour. One can feel the heat of the sun on our backs, the buzzing of the flies, the babbling water as we gaze into it. The eiderdown of soft, luxurious colour. And Strand showing the infinite complexity of structure, the beauty of tone and texture, the wondrous variety of the world under our feet. Both are elegies of art and nature, the expression of love and devotion, the culmination of long, productive lives, of creativity, observation, experience. By their gardens thou shalt know them.